Good evening everyone, welcome to the Council briefing. I'd like to start by acknowledging that tonight we meet on the lands of the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation and pay respects to elders past, present and emerging. And also to note that we do have a beautiful new artwork on the wall this evening. If you saw us having photos, we were with the artist Jade Dolman, and her artwork is called Budja Nakalak Yanging, which is a depiction of the waterways in the city of Vincent and their significance to Noongar people here. So that's something nice that we can all look at when we're in our meetings, which is a really nice addition. I'll just go to apologies. CEO, have we received any apologies this evening? No. Okay. No. Okay, no apologies received at this stage, so we'll assume that Councillor Harley will be joining us. And we'll go straight to public question time and receiving of public statements. Thanks, Paul. Just before you get up, we do have quite a big agenda, and I just wondered if I could have a show of hands of people who wish to speak this evening. Thank you very much. Okay, Paul, come forward. Thank you.
Madam Chair, my name's Paul Kotsoglo. I'm here representing Florida Athena Football Club tonight. We would like to say thank you to the officers and those people that have taken the time to speak with us.
Councillor Harley, who will not be attending the meeting. And in relation to declarations of interest, I believe we do have quite a few this evening, so I'll hand over to the CEO.
Thanks, Mayor Cole. I've received declarations of interest affecting impartiality from Mayor Cole in relation to item 5.5, numbers 77 and 79 Anzac Road. The impartiality interest is that Mayor Cole is an owner-occupied located on the right-of-way on which the proposed group dwelling will be located. Mayor Cole declares that her property is not a neighbouring or adjoining property and was not in the area that the revised application was advertised. I've received a impartiality declaration from Declaration of Impartiality from Councillor Loden in relation to item 7.7, Florida Athena Football Club. Councillor Loden declares that he plays indoor soccer with people who are members of the club and executive. The other three declarations relate to the community budget submissions, item 8.2, and I did raise this with council members earlier today, that we're working on the assumption that a large number of the members of the public and community groups that made submissions would be known to council members during the ordinary course of their duties as council members, and we were just trying to highlight and extract and make sure that any direct financial interests were declared, and we're assuming that all members of council would be familiar with and know a number of the submitters for that item. So specific declarations in relation to the community budget submissions, item 8.2, I did receive one from Mayor Cole. A number of submitters are known to Mayor Cole through children's school connections and a friend through a playgroup association. There is a direct financial interest declared from Councillor Castle in relation to item 8.2. One of the budget submitters, Anne Chappell, is a committee member of the Friends of Anzac Cottage, which is a client of Councillor Castle's business. And Councillor Loden has declared in relation to item 8.2 that Irma Lockmond supported Councillor Loden's campaign in 2015 as a volunteer. And I just wanted to confirm whether or not there were any other declarations that council members wanted to raise in relation to that item.
Does anyone else wish to make a declaration? No, thank you very much. Okay, just to explain the way we now move through the agenda is that we first go to items in the order that they were raised by members of the public gallery, so we won't be going through on a sequential basis at first, we'll be jumping around a little bit. But the first item raised this evening was item 7.7, which is a late report, Florida Athena Football Club Litter Stadium Lease Progress Report. Councillors, questions? Councillor Gontaszewski.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a question through to the, Director for Community and Business Services. I don't know. Anyway, in relation to the timeline that's been presented in the report, we've covered where we're up to so far, and I'm just wondering around the timeline for the activities that have been covered and when the item may return to Council for consideration.
Through you, Mayor Cole, the current lease for Florida Athena does expire in December this year. There is a further 1-year option at Council's discretion, but I think it's appropriate for another update to come to Council prior to the expiration of that first 2 years of the lease. So I would expect it worth something to come back by December, but preferably October or November this year.
Councillors, Councillor Loden.
It wasn't entirely clear from the gallery, but I'm assuming this is the case, but Florida Athena is supportive of this proposed approach. Is that correct?
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, I did attend a meeting with club board representatives last week. Obviously, that was an important conversation around the progress of the work that they've been doing since November 2017, but also a discussion about where to from here. The draft report was actually provided to the board between that meeting and this evening's meeting so that they were comfortable with the content, and whilst there's still a lot more work to be done and there are some indications of some of the arrangements that we might achieve with the club, I think it is fair to say that the club and the city are now on the same page, and I guess that was reflected in the club's attendance tonight, as well as the fact that they did provide some positive input into the report that Council's now considering.
Councillors, Councillor Fotakis.
Through you, Mayor, and this may be a question for the Director, but where are we at with the application for the $3 million federal grant?
Through you, Mayor Cole, the last contact that the City had with the federal government was just after the recent federal government election, in that the department is still assessing the applications, so that's certainly an important outcome from Council considering this report, is that the City, in collaboration with the club, will now formally make contact with the federal government, reaffirm that we're both committed to achieving that $3 million towards Litter Stadium, and to reaffirm to the Australian government that we're working in close partnership. So I would expect that a key outcome of this decision by Council will be the City and the club making contact with the Australian government to find out another status update from them.
And would that include, I noticed that there'd been discussions about the terms of the lease, but additional co-tenants, so have there been any further discussion, or what is the viewpoint, I think, in terms of impact that this might have on the grant, different to the current lease arrangements?
Through you, Mayor Cole, one of the aspects that the club sought federal funding towards was refurbishment of the undercroft of the grandstand to accommodate other community groups. That, I guess, the prioritisation of how those $3 million will be spent will be an important discussion point, first of all between the club and the City, and then also with the Australian government. So at this stage, refurbishment of the grandstand to accommodate other user groups is part of the funding submission, and therefore co-location is an important conversation point, both with the club but with the federal government as well.
Councillors. Director of Community and Business, just to follow up on Councillor Gontaszewski's question, it's I'm just querying whether the motion should have a report back date to council, possibly no later than November 2019, for consideration. Otherwise, happy to move it as a foreshadow an amendment for next week, but would appreciate administration's views on whether that would be workable.
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, in hindsight, I think that would be something appropriate to add into the report, so I'll just prepare an amendment from an administration perspective to make that happen.
Thank you. And I just had a question about whether we could also, I know this will probably come through the body of work that will happen through discussion over options for tenure, but whether at what point we'd get an idea of the cost to the city to maintain the stadium field in particular, or any other costs that may arise in any change of tenure arrangements.
Through you, Mayor Cole, that will certainly be an important part of the discussions with the club in the coming months and the subsequent report back to council. Administration has already identified some cost estimates, particularly for maintenance of the stadium pitch, but also some of the buildings in the stadium surround. So we do have an understanding of what the current costs are, but the extent of the city delivering those maintenance services still remains subject to conversations with the club. So I can certainly make sure that that information is reflected in the report that comes back to council.
Thank you. And just in terms of the direction and the expression of the shared club and community priority capital works at Litter Stadium and Britannia Reserve, that sounds very positive. Do you have at this stage an idea of some of the things that may be discussed that may be of benefit to Britannia Reserve?
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes. The priorities that the club identified through the federal government submission, one of them was construction of new change rooms. Those change rooms will be located at Litter Stadium, but in close proximity to Britannia Reserve, so that they could service both locations. They have been identified as contemporary change rooms that include change rooms and storage, and importantly, female-friendly amenities within those. So that probably is the main one. Improvements to the pitch so that it does have the ability to accommodate increased use. It is already highly utilised, and the club does need to manage how many feet are on that reserve. Changes to the pitch will enable increased community use of that reserve. Amendments to, or improvements I should say, to the undercroft of the grandstand is currently included in the federal government submission, which would enable use by other community groups. That's certainly an aspect that will be important for the city and the club to discuss. One element that we did discuss with the club board last week was improving the interface between the stadium and the reserve, and that would include removing the fencing and to some degree removing some of the mounds so that there is a much clearer interface between the reserve and the stadium. So again, that will be another important outcome from a community accessibility perspective.
And just to follow up on the fencing, are you talking about the perimeter fencing all the way along Britannia Road, or in terms of removing fencing, are we talking about having breaks in the fencing, or is there, I know it's probably very early days, but just to sort of, if you've got any early indications of what would happen potentially with the fencing?
Certainly. Through you, Mayor Cole, this is obviously an important aspect for the club to have input into, but certainly from an administration perspective, we don't see a need for fencing around the stadium. That is an option that the club can have under the National Premier League guidelines to control access and charge for ticket access. We don't see that as a high priority for the stadium, so purely from a city perspective, we would see the potential for all of the perimeter fencing to come down, but obviously that remains subject to further discussions with the club and with Football West.
Thank you, Director. Councillor Toppelberg.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. Just a further question. Just the Britannia Reserve Master Plan proposed for 2020-21. Can we just get some idea in relation particularly to community consultation beyond the club itself and the decision-making process around any long-term tenure for the club, and also potential allocation of the funding and things like interface between the reserve and the stadium, and whether it's proposed that whatever measures would be interim measures between now and 2021 when the master plan is resolved, or whether it's some of those things will become fixed at the point that the master plan process recommences?
Through you, Mayor Cole, I think it'll be a combination of both. Some decision-making, logically, given the fact that the master plan is not too far away, we will pause any firm decision-making so that it can form part of the broader master plan. Having said that, we also have other strategic documents like the POS strategy that gives us really clear actions and clear mandates to achieve certain things, whether it be at the stadium or at the reserve. So I think it will be a balance of logical decision-making that we would probably make through the master plan anyway, that we can make within the next 12 to 24 months, and obviously any longer term or any amendments that have broader implications, we would simply pause until the master plan is undertaken.
Councillors, any further questions on this item? Okay, thank you. The next item raised was item 5.3, which is 160 to 166 Palmerston Street, Perth, change of use to motel, and addition of 11 motel rooms and restaurant cafe. Councillor Toppelberg.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. I've got a number of questions. Just firstly in relation to landscaping. So firstly, am I correct that the two existing trees, forgive my lack of specific knowledge, but I'll call them rubber trees, but the two trees that are significant trees that currently exist on the site around the pool are proposed to be removed under the landscaping plan, is that correct?
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, that's correct.
And in the 3D renderings that I can see, the two palm trees that sit on Palmerston Street that are on the property don't appear there. Does that mean that they are also intended to be removed?
Through you, Mayor Cole, my understanding is that there will be no removal of verge trees.
So they're not on the verge, they're on the applicants. They're within the site currently, but they're two, they provide nothing other than visual amenity, but there's two sort of large crocus palms that sit there, but I can't see them depicted in any of the plans that we've got. Can we assume that they are staying going? I would guess they wouldn't be touched because they don't really form part of the application area, but they're not depicted in the plans at all, but they also don't appear in the landscaping plan.
So to clarify, yes, they will be retained.
Okay. So I just want to ask a couple further questions. So in terms of landscaping, so the comment from the design review panel, and this is the 20th of March, so I understand this is relatively recent, so I'm assuming it was at least the second, or perhaps just the first appearance there. But the comment made by the design review panel was that a landscape architect has been engaged. However, there are limited opportunities for meaningful landscaping given the overall site organisation of the development. Is that something? Can I just ask what actually happened in response to that, either from the city or from the applicant? Because I can only ask a question this week, so I'll just ask it as that.
Through you, Mayor Cole, those were the comments from the DRP on the 20th of March. Just to note that there was subsequently another DRP meeting on the 8th of May with follow-up commentary, probably not to that effect, but noting your point, the concern was really around the way that the layout is arranged with the current buildings on site, and this development being located with a nil setback to Bulwer Street predominantly would limit the opportunity to provide additional landscaping and canopy coverage along that frontage. In saying that, it's also, or it needs to be balanced with providing a development outcome that is reasonable in that context, noting that along Bulwer Street as well as other prominent street corners in this area, there are nil setbacks of buildings, so this type of built form is not out of character, but it's ultimately trying to find opportunities to provide additional landscaping on site.
So, thank you. I'm still going on landscaping. So on page 296 of the agenda papers, there's a ground plan overall, which depicts the existing pool and then the pool terrace, and it shows a couple of significant trees on the eastern side, just underneath where numbers 2 and 5 are. And I've had a quick look at some of the species, but then on the next page, on page 297, and I understand it's just a 3D rendering, but the canopy coverage and the nature of the species looks to be quite different in the overhead image to what's been provided at ground level. Can I just clarify that if that's the landscaping plan that is approved, do we go by the words or do we go by the pictures? How are we actually sure as to what is going to be planted in those areas and what sort of amenity those species will provide?
Sure. Through you, Mayor Cole, there are perspectives included, as you've correctly alluded to. Ultimately, that is to just provide an indication of what is possible. Those tree species have not been confirmed and have not been supported by the city, and that detail needs to be fleshed out. There is a condition that's been recommended if this is to be approved, condition number 5, requiring a detailed landscaping plan to I guess, flesh out that detail.
Okay. Thank you. And finished with landscaping, but just Mr. Merger spoke about the existence of a restaurant and then a hole-in-the-wall style cafe. So I'm on to page 271 of the agenda, which is the ground floor plan. Just for my benefit, the area between where it shows the dining of the 56 seats and then the 12 seats that sit next door to reception, which is, I understand it, the most recent iteration of the plans, because it differs to what appears later in some of the consultant reports. Is the intent, has it been assessed so the 12 seats that are adjacent to reception is cafe and the balance is restaurant? Because to me it appears as a seamless eating space. I'm just curious as to how the two will operate and whether they are actually intended to be independent.
Through you, Mayor Cole, if I understand your question correctly, it's really around which is cafe and which is restaurant, and will they be operating independently. The land use is cafe restaurant, so it's in its entirety. All of those seats will be provided for that purpose of cafe restaurant.
So and perhaps Mr. Merger can answer to you during the week and we can get it in the briefing notes, but it was indicated that the restaurant will primarily provide breakfast, lunch and dinner service for occupants, and there would be a hole-in-the-wall style cafe which would be effectively open to the street. Just curious as to whether it's intended to be that the restaurant part or whether the whole space will be accessible and used as a business that's accessible to non-patrons of the motel.
Through you, Mayor Cole, sure, we can take that on notice and provide you some details in the briefing notes.
Councillor Fotakis.
Thank you, Mayor. Through you to the Director. The applicant mentioned bus tours. Can you just try and ascertain where those buses would park or where the drop-off and pick-up points would be on the plan?
Through you, Mayor Cole, as I understand it, that is already currently in operation. Again, maybe through the briefing notes we can find out exactly how that operates day to day. It is ultimately intended to accommodate backpacker type tourists, so that's the intention. So we can provide further detail to you in briefing notes.
Councillor Loden.
Just on the landscaping aspect, did the city consider a condition around planting additional verge trees to make up for the deficit in tree canopy for the development?
Through you, Mayor Cole, it wasn't explicitly. There are existing verge trees, albeit probably not as accurately depicted in the perspectives, and probably not going to that extent, but nonetheless there are existing verge trees along both Palmerston and Bulwer Street, so that was not pursued.
Did you consider Earl Street? And I note that there is an existing vehicle crossover. I'm not sure if that's still required with the new plans. That I think roughly lines up with where the laundry is.
Through you, Mayor Cole, Earl Street may be a little bit more challenging in terms of the road reservation and where that opportunity would lie. I guess on that basis, it wouldn't be, from my preliminary view, something that could be easily accommodated or something that could provide significant canopy coverage to contribute towards the broader amenity of landscaping.
Is it possible to request staff to have a look at that and just to see if there is an opportunity there? I do note that there are a number of parallel bays on the development side that you could potentially, according to Google Earth anyway, fit some trees in.
Through you, Mayor Cole, we can explore that further, provide some comments and briefing notes.
Councillor Castle.
Through you, Mayor Cole, I just have a question about the restaurant cafe. In the report it states that there were no operating hours specified, but there are indicative hours. Is that something that we should be specifying in this approval? And if we don't, what's the effect of approving it without any operating hours in place?
Through you, Mayor Cole, there was indicative timeframes. You're right, because they haven't confirmed the specific operator. It's difficult, I guess, for the applicant to confirm exactly which times they are seeking. That presents an issue, given that this is in a setting surrounded by predominantly residential development. That may create an issue. In saying that, it is available to council to impose a condition around timeframes and operating hours, what would be reasonably expected in this setting. Maybe administration can provide some comments, having regard for that we do have a licensed premises policy that contemplates different types of land uses. Maybe we can provide some guidance from that.
So if we were to approve it without any hours in place, would that have the effect of allowing it to operate 24 hours a day?
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes.
Councillors, any further questions? Manager, just to note that we spoke yesterday, I think it was, about the actual land use issue, and that there has been the change under the scheme to have the motel use where residential flats, it was residential flats previously, but I just thought that maybe that, I know there is some explanation in the report, but perhaps it could be explained more fully, because my understanding is that in effect there's not really a change in the way that this will operate, but that it's merely about aligning the use under the scheme, under the new scheme versus the old scheme. Is that, would you say that's correct, or has there been any change, proposed change in operation?
Yes, Mayor Cole, that's based on our discussion the other day, that's exactly what's occurred. The use itself was approved by the City of Perth some time ago in 1984 under a different scheme. Different land uses existed at that time. Ultimately, there is no proposed change in actual operating the premises. This is more of a tidying up exercise, and this is the opportunity to bring it into line with the current land uses as defined under our scheme.
Thank you. Any further questions? Okay, moving on. The next item raised was 7.4, which is a late item, adoption of the 2019-2020 annual budget, the big item of the agenda. Questions on this item? Councillor Gonchevsky.
Just in relation to the modelling around rates, just in terms of the confirmation around if we were to reduce residential rates and bring the increase to the minimum rates in line with the general rating strategy, general rating category, what the impact would be to the budget position. if we were to reduce residential rates to 2.7% rather than 2.9%, the increase.
Through you, Mayor Cole. That would reduce the rates generation by $56,000. Sorry, $58,733, which would then reduce the current surplus that's sitting on the rate setting statement down to $7,582. So it could be achieved within the current surplus in the budget.
Councillors, Councillor Loden.
Apologies that I missed it in the commentary, but there's a reference to a loan for solar installation in a replacement page of to create a $1 million loan facility for lot 247 Vincent Street. I just wanted to clarify what that was.
Through you, Mayor Cole, the amendment to the replacement page for the council recommendation item 7 deals with a loan for solar installation in the title, but the body of the text is actually correct in that it is a $1 million loan which is the residual left after the balloon payment required on the DSR building. So we're paying off $5.6 million in a balloon payment. 4 odd million of that is coming from the reserve, and we're required to refinance $1 million. So we will amend the heading on section 7.
Was slightly confusing, Councillor Loden.
Does this mean we're not buying $1 million worth of solar panels?
Councillors, questions on the budget? I have a few. So I just wanted to flag an amendment for the 2.7% increase for the residential category, including the minimum. I also just wanted to ask whether we could have some additional commentary in the report. I know that a lot of this would come through the budget newsletter, but I thought it would be quite good to have in the report a list of the carry forward projects and items under the capital budget, and a snapshot ahead of the budget newsletter that gives an idea of some of the key projects and initiatives. I can give you some examples if you would like. Would that be helpful? Well, I've just written some examples here. I think that for someone who's reading the report but may not necessarily wish to go through all of the attachments, it would be good to outline some of the work that we'll be doing in public open space. So, for example, the Banks Reserve Active Zone, the 2 master plans that we have scheduled, discussion that there's $340,000 towards community budget submissions. You have mentioned the FOGO Reserve, but it might be useful to add that here, but given that that is a sizable investment, where we're looking at about 50% funding of that significant project. Some commentary around the proposed community hub. And I think it's always useful to have some commentary on expenditure towards some of the bread and butter, footpaths, roads, drainage, some of the renewal and maintenance issues that we're tackling, such as Beatty Park Leisure Centre, for combined total spend on maintenance at our premier facility, expenditure on greening, expenditure on right-of-ways, and perhaps flagging some of our new initiatives like the Love Your Laneway initiative, and also just some commentary on fees and charges, because I didn't think there was, I think in previous years we have had a bit more commentary on fees and charges. So I'm happy to continue a list and keep providing that to you through the week, but I thought that might, just for someone who didn't wish to go through all the papers but just wanted a bit of a snapshot when reading the report, that might be useful.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. Yes, we can update the report.
Thank you very much. Councillor Murphy.
Yeah, I've just got a couple of questions on the fees and charges. On page 227, just wondering if you could explain the fee and let me know how many people were charged this fee over the past year. Just in regards to the reprint of annual rate notice fee, the instalment of administration fee, and the special payment arrangement fee. So that's just what's the fee exactly for, and how many people were charged this over the past year. Also, on page 280, what is the filming fee for? Is that for someone to obtain permission to film on their Verge? Page 296, if you can explain the percent for art threshold value, that would be great in the briefing notes. And also, I'd like to know on page 304, in regards to the Leederville Oval hire rates, how many times Leederville Oval was hired out for commercial purposes in the last year? I notice.
Through you, Mayor Cole, we will take each of those items on notice, with the exception of the percent for art question.
Yes, through you, Mayor Cole. The threshold value is the value of developments that are required to pay percent for art, and that value is calculated based on the city's current policy. So each year that value changes based on what the policy says it should be. So it's an increase in CPI roughly.
Great, thank you.
Director of Community and Business, do you know the answer to how many times Leederville Oval has been hired annually? Would it be one?
Through Mayor Cole, no, possibly two. Fundamentally, it's the AFL's pre-season game and St Patrick's Day, so I'm certain it would be two, but I'll just double check that there hasn't been any other minor bookings and confirm that in the briefing notes.
Councillor Loden.
Just a question on the rate setting. We've got a minimum rate for commercial vacant and other increase of 2.9%, and the everybody else is 1.5%. I'm guessing it's not a huge amount, but what's the difference if that was reduced to if they were both reduced to 1.5%?
Through the chair, or through you, Mayor Cole, the foreshadowing change would actually result in the minimum increase being the same as the rate in the dollar increase. So that is, if I understand you correctly, what is actually proposed in the foreshadowed amendment. So the community vacant would increase by 1.5% rate in the dollar and 1.5% minimum.
So I guess just to clarify then, what you spoke to was the all of them basically being both the residential, commercial vacant and other all being reduced to the same as the current rate in the dollar, excluding the residential, so just the commercial vacant and other. What is that worth?
Through you, Mayor Cole, so the foreshadowed amendment would see commercial vacant increasing by 1.5%, which is what was proposed, which was what was advertised, but the minimum increasing by 1.5% as opposed to 2.9%. And it would include residential increasing by 2.7% and the minimum by 2.7%, whereas it was advertised as 2.9% for both. And the other category increasing by 1.5% and the minimum increasing by 1.5%, where it was advertised as the minimum increasing by 2.9%. And that entire change would reduce the rates income by $58,733.
So I'll ask it a different way. So the total amount of the proposed amendment is $58,000. If we left the commercial vacant and other unchanged at 2.9% and just reduced the residential from 2.9 minimum rate from 2.9 to 2.7, how much would that be?
Only a couple of commercials on the minimum.
Through the chair, I'd need to take that on notice, but it would not be very much. There would be only a few properties in the commercial vacant category, and whilst there would be more in the other, there wouldn't be a lot of them actually in the minimum category, so we'll take that on notice.
Councillors, questions? Councillor Murphy?
Sorry, Mick. Oh, sorry, through the chair. I'll go back to the Leadville Oval. Did the AFL pay the commercial hire or the community rate for hiring the Leadville Oval?
Through Mayor Cole, I'll need to double check, but my understanding was it was the commercial rate. We did reduce the bump in and bump out periods for that particular event to reduce costs, but I'm quite sure that it was the commercial rate that was applied to the AFL.
Thank you.
The CEO was just informing me that 1/3 of that revenue came to the City of Vincent. Yep. Any further questions on the budget? Okay, thank you everyone. We're moving on to item 6.3, which is the North Perth Precinct Traffic Study. Councillor Hallett.
Through you to the Director of Infrastructure and Environment. Just a few questions. Just wondering if you could comment on the comments from the public gallery in terms of the original petition not being just about traffic speeds but broader amenity, and our response to that.
Through you, Mayor Cole, without the petition in front of me, I couldn't comment, so I'll need to check the exact wording and respond through the briefing notes.
Fine if this is in the notes as well, but just wondering if you can comment on some of those issues that they raised around damaged footpaths, curb ramps, missing or damaged, difficult crossings, a lack of amenity from lack of street trees. I understand that there's been some action on that, and wonder if you could just outline what has been done in the preceding months.
Yeah, through you, Mayor Cole, I couldn't tell you exactly what's been done. We'll have to go back and check, but those are matters of routine maintenance, and as they're reported, we make those repairs. Obviously, you know that the city is very keen to plant street trees, which we're doing regularly, so we're always looking for opportunities to plant street trees as well, and that's an ongoing programme. So,
And just lastly, just about the, comments about consultation, and just wondering what, in the current recommendation, there's some consultation in terms of locations of slow points and things. Just wondering if you could outline what that consultation would look like, but then also more broadly, what scope is there to take these recommendations out to that local precinct for consultation in, a more meaningful way.
Yeah, through you, Mayor Cole. Typically, we would issue information to the people directly affected and listen to their feedback and adjust the design accordingly. So if there was a slow point to be located near somebody's house, we'd speak to them, and if there were some adjustments that were possible, based on their feedback, we would do it. To answer the second question, if the will of the council was to take the matter more widely to all the people in the precinct, that wouldn't be a problem. We could do that. Noting that most of these recommendations have already been consulted on in the past, but we're happy to do it again based on the new report.
And just wondering if you've got any comments about potential pilots using tactical urbanism for water-filled blockages in the roads?
Through you, Mayor Cole, well, we know that's been done. There is potential to do it. We'd have to think about it very carefully. The particular location mentioned, we'd have to model the change in traffic flow before we did that. So remember, that was a recommendation for the long term, and it would require a lot more work before we install that, because we've not modelled the influence it will have on the traffic in the precinct. So, albeit short-term trial might be inexpensive, we'd still have to understand what that would do to traffic.
Thanks. And just to flag an amendment around some community engagement around the recommendations.
Councillor Loden.
I was wondering if we could include in the briefing a higher resolution version of the maps on page 573, 575 and 576, which are the 3 maps in the consultant's report. It might just be my old man eyes, but I can't see them for the life of me. And I know it's described. I know it's described in the report, but it helps me to understand exactly what's going on there. The second one was just around the 5 proposed mid-block slow points. What is the vegetation that you're proposing to stick into those slow points? Will they be trees or shrubs or what?
So the ones recommended through your call would be shrubs.
Is there ability to plant trees in those?
Through my call, I'm being informed that we can do that. It would mean changing the design, but we could do it.
Does it require an amendment to achieve that?
Through my call, I don't think so. We can just go back and look at that design.
And then on the entry statement, so should I be thinking that the entry statements, which is the ultimate scenario, if I'm viewing the map correctly, is something that might be considered if there is a successful 40k trial and if this was then subsequently rolled out? Is that the way to think about it?
Through my call, not quite. So what's been suggested through the report is that there are a number of immediate actions we could take to deal with the areas of greatest need, if you like, if the highest speed, etc. So those are relatively low costs already budgeted for and would have a high impact. The longer term things, the bigger picture, the raised plateaus, etc. What we're suggesting is that we shouldn't do those at this point. We should wait for the 40k trial to be completed, as that may be the solution across Vincent in the future. So we're not proposing we do that right now. They're obviously a higher cost, so we think that's the sensible approach to take at this point.
So are the raised plateaus the entry statements, or are they different things?
Through you, Mayor Cole. The raised plateaus are what you've got on the corner of Anzac and Fairfield Street. Anzac and Fairfield Street is a raised plateau, whereas the entry statement, if you're familiar with Strathcona and Newcastle Street near the West End Alley down in West Perth, that's an entry statement where we bring the nibs out, plant those, and there's a speed hump in the middle of it, whereas the raised plateau traverses the whole intersection.
And so the entry statements are to be considered in the future, or they're not to be considered?
Through my call, to be considered as a long-term strategy.
Thank you. Just going back to some of the questions that Councillor Hallett raised and were also raised from the gallery, just in terms of the queries related to curb ramps, is there a particular standard or some sort of general principle around where or curb ramps are placed and how often they are provided within a particular streetscape?
Through you, Mayor Cole, if we were retrofitting, we'd be applying the new or current standards. The majority of the curb ramps in that area are obviously the old City of Perth standards, and we change them on need, really. If they're damaged or we have a specific need, requirement, or someone requests one, we'll go and change it. But we haven't got a program to wholesale change all the curb ramps in that area.
And so that's changing from one design to another. And what about whether there is a curb ramp? I guess I'm just trying to think. We don't have curb ramps on every single corner in that area, do we?
Through you, Mayor Cole, where every path terminates at a road, we have a curb ramp.
I guess I'm sort of unsure in relation to what's been raised, but it would appear that there is that the residents have raised an issue of curb ramps or whether it's standard or placement, and whether it would be whether we So you're saying that we don't proactively audit our footpaths. It's more of a reactive approach in relation to that. And the same with street trees in terms of additional placement. Are you aware if any of these streets in the area have been prioritised for additional street tree placement in the coming year?
Through you, Nicole. So in regard to the street trees, I'd have to check. So I'd have to take that question on notice to see if any of the streets in this area are being prioritised. In terms of the curb ramps, I think you're right, there isn't a proactive programme, but what my colleague said is correct. If we get a report of damage or request to improve a ramp, then we'll bring it up to the current standard.
And just to confirm, in terms of this area, if you could include in the briefing notes any maintenance on footpaths or curb ramps that has been undertaken in response to issues raised by residents, and that if that could be included, that would be great.
Through you, Nicole, yeah, we'll do that.
Oh, and one more thing. Is it common practice for residents to present at the UMAG, and have residents had an opportunity to be present at UMAG for the discussion in relation to this item to date?
Through you, Nicole, they've not been invited to a discussion at UMAG, I know that. And during my time at the city, which is 16 months or so, I'm not aware of any groups, members of the public that have come to present at UMAG.
You're okay? Okay. Councillor Vatakis? Councillor Vatakis and then Councillor Murphy.
Thank you, Mayor. Through you, Mayor, to the Director. Member of the public raised in the gallery, Geraldine raised the diagonal road closures. Can you just give some explanation whether consideration was given to that at all?
Through you, Mayor Cole, that was part of the long-term strategy. In the event that the 40k trial was considered unsuccessful, we needed to look at other measures for that area. It has a significant impact on the surrounding streets because obviously it's going to direct traffic or concentrate traffic on View Street, for example, and potentially Claverton Street and Raglan, etc., as people try to find alternate ways to get to, say, North Perth Plaza or Fitzgerald Street. So it's not a move we'd take lightly, and as the Director said, we'd have to model it quite extensively to see what the impact would be.
Yeah, the gentleman in the gallery mentioned filtering. Can you explain what filtering is for me, please? A layman?
Through you, Mayor Cole, I think he's referring to basically cul-de-sacs. We used Elmer Road on the eastern side of Fitzgerald Street as an example, and it is a cul-de-sac at the junction with Fitzgerald, and as a consequence or result, it stops the through traffic. It makes it more circuitous route to get back to where you want to go. So he's talking about a whole system of streets being restricted or reduced access.
And what would the ballpark cost of a cul-de-sac or a filter be? Ballpark.
Through you, Mayor Cole, entry statements we estimate are roughly $15,000. It's probably upwards of that because the issue is giving the ability of the traffic that's going down there to turn around. So we have to do a fair bit more widening and obviously signage. And so there are other issues in service relocation potentially. So guesstimate would be $30,000.
Great, thanks.
Just in relation to the modelling on the diagonal closure of Alma and Leek, we've got quite a bit of data collected through this process in relation to traffic movements. Would it be envisaged that additional data collection would be required to undertake that modelling, or would it more just be doing the modelling that is the next step?
Through you, Mayor Cole, I think the information we got would form the basis for the modelling. Obviously, we'd have to continue that process to assess the impact if we were to go down that path.
Councillors, any further questions? So we have an amendment flagged. Just noting Councillor Hallett is going to be on leave next week, but has flagged an amendment to be moved in relation to consultation. Yep, so we can have that prepared and put on the table. and we can deal with that next week. Okay. Councillor Gonchevsky.
The Blondes. While we're foreshadowing amendments, I don't have a form of words in my head, but perhaps something in relation to, pending the outcome of what comes back through the briefing notes, in relation to a audit of maintenance issues and footpaths, street tree placement, possibly lighting in the area. So happy to discuss over the next week, but perhaps just an amendment in relation to some of the amenity and maintenance issues that have been raised by the residents to date.
You've just prompted me to ask a question, although it is unrelated. Director, I'm just wondering, because we actually have requested a traffic study to look at how North Perth Common works, and given that this is in this area, is there any commentary that you could provide in the report around North Perth Common and that functioning going forward in relation to some of the longer term ideas put forward by the consultant, particularly talking about diagonal closures, etc.?
Yep, through you, Michael, we could put some additional information. Well, we certainly started work on looking at the intersection of View Street and Fitzgerald in light of North Perth Common, so we could put some commentary in about that.
Thank you. Any further questions on this one? Okay, thanks. Next item was 5.4, which is a late report, number 11 Douglas Street, Perth, proposed change of use to unlisted use, dog daycare. Councillor Toppelberg.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. First question relates to the applicant made some comments in relation to the proposed duration of the approval. Previously, officers have recommended, where they have had a time-limited approval for a business that perhaps has high start-up costs, have recommended 3-year, 5-year or even longer terms. Can we just get some clarity whether the officers are comfortable with a 12-month recommendation?
Through you, Mayor Cole, I accept the applicant's concern around viability. Officers' view when approaching this was balancing that with legitimate concerns from adjoining tenants and landowners around potential impacts from that development if it wasn't managed to that standard. So on that basis, administration recommended the 12 months, including a review of the management practices, the rigorous management practices that have been put forward in a revised proposal prior to the 6-month period. So that was what was put forward by administration, and thought that was a reasonable way forward on the basis that it would provide some certainty in terms of its operation and ensuring that it is managed to the standards as expected. Now, if we were to contemplate a longer period of time in terms of a time-limited approval, open to that, but just conscious that elected members would need to be aware also of any off-site impacts if it isn't managed to a certain standard. Now, ultimately, we do have a compliance team that can monitor that, but a lot of the management regime put in place, such as staggering of pick-up and drop-offs, which is reliant on people and behaviours, may be a little bit more difficult to police and to enforce. So just bear that in mind.
Thank you. Now, I understand, so Mr Silbert spoke about some concerns, particularly in relation to deliveries or access, property access. I know the report deals with some of the amenity concerns and some of the noise concerns, but just in relation to the front of house, I suppose, itself, I know there's been some discussion, I know you and I have discussed, and the Director and I discussed previously under the original application. There's some issues, I think, that are unique to this strata. Can we get some clarity around access rights, car parking bays, and who has rights to access what part of that bitumenised area that sits out the front of the three properties that make up the strata? If it's too hard to say in words, I'm happy for it to come in the briefing notes, but just when people come to drop off, if they park on one side and move to the other, what's common property, what is actually accessible to everybody, what's designated as parking that's attributed to each of those tenancies?
Through you, Mayor Cole, there is a section in the report dealing with parking and that very issue. I'll try to summarise that. Ultimately, this is the applicant's contention that they have access to 4 bays on site. Based on the strata plan, which is included as attachment 6, it clearly shows that all of that parking area to the front of the tenancies are held in common property. On that basis, all 7 bays which exist on site, one of which is a disabled parking bay, are all used or held in common property and available to all of the tenants. There is a wide verge area which is used informally for some parking. That has not been included in terms of the city's assessment. There's 7 bays available for all tenants. None of those are signposted for exclusive use by any of the particular tenants. So that would be the parking configuration, that it is available to any of those tenancies.
Any further questions? No? Okay.
Sorry, I did have one further. The discussion in relation to, there's some discussion in the report about the intent to put some acoustic material between the property and the one immediately adjacent, but there's no condition recommended to require it. Can we just get some comments from the administration as to whether it obviously forms part of the acoustic assessment and whether that's something that would actually be required, or whether, given the conditions that are proposed and the need for the applicant to adhere to them, whether that would be sufficient?
Through you, Mayor Cole, there was some suggestion from the applicant that they would be willing to install some additional acoustic insulation. Details around that have not been provided, I guess, based on the timing, and it's been quite a short turnaround time from SAP mediation to progress to this point. With that being said, that actually did not form part of the acoustic report that has previously been undertaken. When that acoustic report was undertaken in support of the original application that was ultimately refused, it already complied with noise regulations. On that basis, any additional noise insulation as proposed by the applicant would be in addition to this. On that basis, and in the absence of any details regarding how practical that acoustic insulation would be, it wasn't included as a condition because it would be otherwise over and above compliance with the noise requirements.
Just following up on that question, Manager, is it possible to have that added as an advice note if the applicant was still willing to provide it?
Through you, Mayor Cole, that's possible, and maybe stemming on from this, we can touch base with the applicant to better understand maybe some of the details around that acoustic insulation and include that as advice note, include that in the briefing notes as well.
Thank you. Councillor Fotakis.
Thank you, Mayor. Through you. I just wanted to address the point that was raised by Mr Silbert in the gallery, the proximity to food services and the concerns regarding health and hygiene.
Through you, Mayor Cole, a real consideration for the coffee roasters 2 doors down. In liaising with our environmental health officers, there is no explicit provision or head of power around the hygiene concern. There is a management plan that does outline the hygiene approach and steps that will be taken to minimise, I guess, any concerns in that space. So that again is a requirement or a condition recommended to be imposed around adherence to those strict operational procedures. Ultimately, that is still a concern for the adjoining landowner. I'll just note that as part of the revised proposal, it's no longer proposed to have the dogs in any of the common property areas, whether it's through the car park in the front or to the rear of the property. It's ultimately the dogs will be walked in on a leash when they're dropped off and picked up on a leash as well, so they'll be with a carer at all times to minimise any of potential concerns around hygiene.
Councillors, I just had a question around the finish time, because I have received a letter from the applicant saying that she had requested a 6 p.m. finish time, and I wondered whether that had been considered by administration, and also whether that would aid further staggering of the pickup time. And there was also a question about the bike rack provision, but just assuming that that is just simply required, as that facility is pretty dated and hasn't had any bike facilities previously provided.
Sure, through Mayor Cole. In terms of hours of operation, the applicant has previously noted that in terms of the hours that the premise will be available for clients to be dropping off their dogs and picking them up, it would be from 6:45 a.m. to 5:30 p.m. That's again covered in the operations procedure, noting that new dogs on their first day would be dropped off at an earlier time, 6:30 a.m. So that's been accounted for in terms of the condition that the city has ultimately recommended. The applicant suggested that following the last dogs being picked up at 5:30 p.m, the premise would still be open to the staff until 6 p.m. That hasn't been specifically referred to in the condition. The purpose of the condition is really to reflect when the premise is open to the public, and I guess that's the rationale. It's not to further limit the operational time. In respect to does that have any, or would that provide any assistance in terms of reducing peak demand in terms of traffic? I think that there's an argument that it would. If you extend the operating hours, it would ultimately allow for greater staggering and less peak demand. Noting that there isn't residents in close proximity to this, so in terms of operating hours in a commercial area, that is open to the city to consider extending that. That's the hours of operation. In terms of bicycle parking, ultimately that condition was recommended by the city's officers because in the traffic impact report, included as attachment 5, it basically sets out that the proponents indicated a desire to install 4 bicycle racks at the rear of the premises, ultimately for the staff to access. So in consideration of the acceptability of the amount of car parking to support this use, that is something that would reduce, in the city's view, a reliance on vehicle parking for staff, and on that basis I think it's something that should be required to be provided.
And also, just it'd be useful just to get some commentary, because when I've spoken with neighbours that have concerns, and they talk about the emerging nature of this precinct, that there's a lot of creative industries, galleries, that is a sort of changing in nature of the area, that it's sort of moving away. Well, it still does have industrial use, it's moving away from that, but given under the MRS that this is zoned industrial and that it is a commercial use, can you just give some commentary around how that would be viewed at the SAT if the city were to argue that this is a precinct that is moving away from its stated use?
Sure, Nicole. Ultimately, I think that's a relevant consideration in terms of the intention for that area and the where we see it transitioning. It is industrial under the MRS, but it's also commercial under our local planning scheme and mixed use under our built form area. So that gives you an indication of where we envisage this in the future. Ultimately, it won't remain industrial forever, and you're noticing that with the types of creative uses and industries that's emerging in that area. Ultimately, we have before us, though, a use that is unlisted, and so the requirements and the considerations really by SAT and that the city now has to consider is, does this use or is this use consistent with the intention and the objectives of that commercial zoning, which is ultimately what is underlying. On that basis, an assessment needs to be done around the types of uses that you would expect and envisage in a commercial area. There's everything from an office on site to coffee roasting business, but then there's also a paddle beaters not far away, an art gallery. So it's a real mix and diverse range of land uses, but what is common between all of them is that they're non-residential in nature, and the closest residential and most sensitive use is some 60 metres away across the road from Newcastle Street. So those are the relevant considerations, and I think ultimately that's what SAT will be having regard for in that determination if this was to progress further.
Thank you, Manager. Are there any further questions? Okay, thank you. Move to item 5.2. Number 539 to 545 Beaufort Street, Mount Lawley, 8-storey mixed-use development. Questions on this item? Councillor Loden?
I take it this didn't go to JDAP because it was 9.98 million, so just under the 10 million threshold?
No, through you, Mayor Cole, the applicant opted for, and for council to determine the application rather than the JDAP because it was within that 2 to 10 million range.
And we've got the two offices on the second floor and then the retail on the ground floor. If the applicant wanted to make them offices, is there ability to us give them the flexibility to do that instead of making it all retail?
Through Mayor Cole, the option exists for council to approve that. It's a discretionary decision. It's not recommended under the scheme that I think it's. I can't remember what the wording is, but basically, office on the ground floor is not a permitted use, and council would need to exercise discretion to allow that.
I've got a question on that. So that Barry mentioned, that we need the development in the street, and we do. Though having retail on the ground floor when there's 35 other retail vacancies in close proximity, I understand what you're saying.
Councillor Murphy, you're asking a question.
Sorry, I am asking a question, just putting some context. My question is, what we need is cultural anchors in Beaufort Street, and is there a way that we could use, because I note that the percent for art is not allocated to a specific artwork at this point. Is there a way that we could use percent for art to build cultural infrastructure in one of the tenancies so it could be a cultural anchor? For example, theatre seating, a stage, micro cinema, art gallery infrastructure, something that would be non-retail, non-cafe, non-bar, but have an increased amenity to the street, but still within an arts and cultural. So I know it's a bit of a tricky one, but throw that one at you.
It's through you, Mayor Cole. The applicant has applied for retail uses on the ground floor. Obviously, the development is a number of years away from being completed, and it is likely, and the applicants advise the city that it's likely that when they get to the point of seeking tenants, that they will lodge change of use applications. So they are currently looking at retail, but they're not certain of that. At the moment, that's what their proposal is, though. So in relation to community anchors, there is certainly a role for council to play in delivering and addressing those kinds of issues on Beaufort Street, but the planning or the development application process needs to be guided by the city's policies and the scheme and the regulations and the Act, and none of which address that issue and set out a requirement around community infrastructure being required in development applications. So there is certainly a role for council to play, but it's not through this development application and assessment process.
Councillors, it's a good idea. Councillor Fotakis.
Thank you, Mayor. Councillor Murphy, you asked my question, so it was a valid one, so thank you. Looking at the light well, is that a natural or artificial light? I'm just looking at the diagram on page 69, which is the roof plan. I can't see the light well extending to the external, so just a bit of a clarification on that, please.
Yes, through you, Mayor Cole, I'll need to take that on notice and provide that in the briefing notes and explain that light well more clearly and why the plans don't reflect it on the roof.
Thank you. And also, just on the plantings, there's quite substantial growth illustrated in those in the plantings level 2 and on the top floor. Was there any special consideration or any specific infrastructure that has been built into the development that would allow and encourage that substantial growth?
Yes, through you, Mayor Cole, the depth of the soil and the extent of the planters is very unique. The city hasn't had a proposal that's had the deep multi-level depth of planters to support the large trees and the canopy coverage. The application actually proposes something like 49% canopy coverage, and that is a result of the planning that's gone into this development application stage for the soil to support those planters. So it is unique, and that is certainly an important element to this proposal. A lot of work will need to go into the landscaping plan to prove that up and ensure that the landscaping can be delivered, but the structural elements are there because the depth of soil across multiple levels, rather than the typical half a metre of soil, has been provided and engineered into this design.
Councillor Castle.
Through you, Mayor Cole, a question for Director of Development Services, or whatever your title is now. But you've actually possibly already answered it to Councillor Murphy. With the two uses that we are proposing to approve, office and shop, but the plans are showing a cafe on that curved outlet on the corner. Is under its current wording, that wouldn't actually be approved in this particular application?
Sorry, through you, Mayor Cole, could you just repeat that last part?
I think what Alex is asking, Councillor Castle is asking whether the presentation in the elevation picture presents as a cafe, but it's seeking approval for retail.
Yes, through you, Mayor Cole, they are seeking approval for retail on the plans. The perspectives aren't part of the approval, and so and you're right, they do indicate perhaps a cafe use or small bar use on that corner, but that's not what's being applied for or what's being recommended for approval.
So it's really just to clarify that the same answer you gave Councillor Murphy is that those applications for change of use may come later once there's actual tenants on board.
Yes, through Mayor Cole, the applicant has advised that it's likely that once they have tenants on board, they'll be seeking change of use applications. At this stage, they don't have any tenants lined up, and they currently are looking for retail. Yep.
Councillor Toppelberg.
Just for clarity on that, particularly retail tenancy, one, just confirming that it can accommodate for grease trap and other, it could accommodate a kitchen easily if required.
Yes, through Mayor Cole, that was discussed with the applicant, but I'll take it on notice and we'll provide a full explanation about which tenancies can accommodate and which wouldn't be able to.
Councillor Gonchevsky.
Just in relation to the residential tenancies that receive no direct sunlight, in the report, it combines the commentary around building depth, solar access, daylight and natural ventilation. And just if some more commentary could be put forward in relation to that, deviation from the acceptable outcomes and the element objectives in the codes or some commentary here in relation to the acceptability of that from a design perspective, and also just to confirm that no involvement with the DRP through this process. I guess particularly in relation to the issues around natural daylight, direct sunlight. Sorry.
Yes, through you, Mayor Cole, the number of dwellings that have access to direct sunlight is mentioned in the detailed assessment section. In the detailed section in that table. I'm not sure if that's...
No, I understand that
Yep.
54% of the residential dwellings, which I think is 14 out of the 26, don't actually have access to direct sunlight. I'm just saying that doesn't appear to meet the acceptable outcomes in the current planning tools, and would appreciate some commentary, because the commentary currently really just talks about solar access and other things. So I was just wondering if I could get some specific commentary on that
Yes,
point.
certainly. And that should be in the report, and we'll update that to include that in the report. My apologies. That was flagged up earlier with me as well, so I'll make sure that's added in. In essence, the property has 3 street frontages, and the only side of the property that doesn't have a street frontage is the northern side. And so access to direct sun is very difficult when the development also needs to provide direct frontage to each of those streets. So in summary, that's the rationale. I think the applicant has done, and I think the design review panel agrees, that the applicant has done the best they can in the context of this site to maximise the number of units that have access to direct sun. Now, the design review panel didn't provide a specific comment on that because they were comfortable with that proposal.
Thank you, that is helpful, because I was also struggling with that being a variation, and then it talking about on page 50 that there is sufficient light into all apartments, so it was a bit, Who's next? Okay, I'll ask some questions. Director, I just wanted to ask in relation to the parking. It talked about the fact that there was more than required for residential, and there was potentially some excess if there was a condition to require visitor parking. It also talked about the fact that there isn't an ACROD bay. Is a apartment and complex of this size obliged to provide an ACROD bay for visitors?
Through you, Mayor Cole, potentially it will depend on the commercial uses proposed and the nature of the car park, and that will be determined at the building permit stage. So that will be addressed under the National Construction Code, and there is adequate space in the basement, given the number of excess bays that are provided for the apartments, for that to be accommodated.
And just while we're on parking, just use of tandem parking, would there be any requirement that tandem parking, where there are 2 bays together, that they could only be used by and allocated to one tenancy or one residential apartment, just in terms of the actual usability and functionality of tandem parking?
Yes, through you, Mayor Cole, they would typically be allocated to one tenancy or one apartment.
And just in relation to the issue of there not being communal space in the building and the issue of the north-facing aspect of the building, has the applicant given any consideration to a north-facing roof terrace, which could also benefit canopy, additional canopy planting? I note that there are solar panels on the roof, which is absolutely fantastic to see, but has that been discussed? Was that discussed by the DRP or through administration's discussion with the applicant?
Yes, through you, Mayor Cole, that was discussed with the design review panel, and the applicant, and subsequently again, the administration discussed it with the applicant as well. The applicant's response was that, in their experience, the communal open space needs to be designed. For particular developments, communal open space is very important, particularly where it's a diverse development that's occurring across a large land area, and there's a variety of apartments, might be group dwellings with apartments, and the development can be designed in such a way that the communal open space is critical and core to those users. In a location like this on Beaufort Street, and in an apartment development like this where there isn't any at-ground opportunity for communal open space, the applicant's experience is that communal open spaces can cause a number of issues for tenants and can be very difficult to manage and can actually increase issues between residents. They did consider the roof terrace. We specifically asked them to look at the opportunity for a roof terrace, but the applicant raised concern around those issues as well as concern around the loss of solar panels on the roof, which are an important part of the proposal, and the environmentally sustainable design outcomes that they're looking to achieve. And I can provide the applicant's explanation as to why they weren't supportive of that, and they haven't proposed that as part of the application in the briefing notes.
Yes, I'd definitely be interested in that. Also, just in relation to the right-of-way and the potential in the future for that right-of-way to develop, in terms of the floor-to-ceiling height, is there any potential for that to be retrofitted in the future, if and when we reach our, carless future? That there has been some discussion about the laneways in and around Beaufort Street providing a really amazing opportunity for development and small tenancies activation along the laneways. So I was just wondering, in terms of ceiling heights and potential retrofitting, whether that had been considered at all.
Yes, through Mayor Cole, it was discussed with the applicant as part of the design review panel meetings. I recall that. It looks to me like the floor-to-ceiling heights would allow that if parking was not considered necessary in the future, some of that parking. But I'll need to take that on notice and speak to the applicant and provide some detailed information around that.
And this is just a minor thing, but in the elevations, it does look like there's cedar panelling on the ceilings of the balconies, and I just thought that was a nice material in contrast to the rendered glazed facade, and I wondered whether that was just for picture purposes, or whether that sort of material would be used in the balconies.
Yes, through Mayor Cole, the applicant has done a lot of work on the materials and finishes. I can't recall exactly what the timber finish was, but it was a timber finish, and that was an important part of their proposal. So yes.
Good to know, thank you. I think that was it. Just checking. Just in relation, in terms of landscape architecture and the use of the deep planters and the what do you call it? On-structure planting, thank you, Councillor Toppelberg. In terms of the orientation and the species selection, has that really been nailed in terms of access to sunlight and whether the species would... I know there's a lot of talk about reticulation and use of rainwater, which is great, but in terms of actual overshadowing and orientation, has that also been given consideration by the landscape architect?
Yes, through Mayor Cole, I'd need to take that on notice to ensure to get a response from the applicant on that issue. It has been discussed a number of times at the design review panel, and they do have a landscape architect on board working on that project. So I'll take that on notice and provide you some information around exactly what's been considered at this stage.
Thank you, Director. Councillor Castle.
Sorry, I have one more question. Apologies if I've missed this in the report, but can you explain how the car stackers will work, and if there are any noise or other concerns with that facility?
Yes, through Mayor Cole, the car stackers, we can provide some information around how they operate.
How they propose they'll operate in this particular application? Will they be allocated? Is it simply one big one, or how does it work?
Yes, through Mayor Cole, there's multiple car stackers, and they will be a bay will be allocated to each resident who will be parking within the car stacker. We can provide some information around how that will be managed, but in essence, each tenancy gets a bay. They enter that in the car. When they arrive, the car stacker will move to that level, their car will be parked, and they can retrieve their car in the same way. In relation to noise, they'll need to demonstrate compliance with the compliance with the noise regulations, and that's something that we manage regularly with car stackers, which we have a few of in the city.
Councillors? Okay, ready to move on? Thank you. The last item that was raised by a member of the public gallery this evening was number 5.2, 539 to 545. Oh no, sorry, we've just done that. We've finished. Sorry, apologies. We are now moving sequentially through the agenda. So we will go to 5.1. Number 14, Orange Avenue, Perth, second storey addition and alterations to a single dwelling. We should all be very familiar with this application by now. Any questions? Councillor Toppelberg.
Thank you. Just noting that I did attend mediation on this one. Just to confirm that, so I'll ask it as a question, but just to confirm that the building designer for the proposal spent time with the chair of the DRP privately during the mediation and that what has been submitted was submitted after that fact, obviously not disclosing anything that happened at mediation, but that was discussed. But can you confirm exactly? That's my rising inflection at the end to make it a question. Just confirming that the applicant did have some time with the chair of the DRP at that moment, did she not?
Yes, through Mayor Cole, the applicant did discuss the design with the chair of the city's design review panel, and subsequently provided amended plans, which have also been reviewed by the chair of the city's design review panel to confirm that the suggestions that he'd made had been addressed and made.
Okay, and also just confirming that the two neighbours, the one in the literal adjoining property and the one in the adjacent property, have been notified that the matter's coming back to council for further determination this week and next, or for determination next week. Is that correct?
Yes, through Mayor Cole, that occurs every time, but I will check and confirm and provide that in the briefing notes.
Councillors, any further questions on 5.1? Okay, thank you. Moving on to 5.3. No, we've done that one, sorry, 5.5. Number 77 and 79 Anzac Road, Mount Hawthorn, amendment to development approval for 6 group dwellings. Any questions? No. 5.6 Mount Hawthorn Town Centre Place Plan. Councillor Loden.
Just a couple of questions, or I should say a few. We didn't consider the draft SES as part of the development of this plan, to my understanding. Is that correct? And if so, why not?
Through you, Mayor Cole, I think that the council report refers to the current sustainable environment strategy, but we were working collaboratively with the team developing the new draft. That just wasn't reflected in the council report, so we'll update that for the council meeting.
The report refers to the greening plan, and I wasn't sure what specific actions were being taken in Mount Hawthorn Place Plan as part of the greening plan.
Through you, Mayor Cole, I might take that one on notice and provide some detailed commentary in the briefing notes.
The report does make reference to supporting night trade, but doesn't make any reference to day trade in Mount Hawthorn. I was just wondering why that was.
Through you, Mayor Cole, one of the issues that was identified as being something that needs to be addressed through action from the city was looking at the night trade. As far as our analysis went, it wasn't considered that the day trade was a particularly big issue that the city needs to assist and help resolve. So that's why there's a focus on the night trade.
I didn't see anything around bicycle infrastructure through the town centre, so we've got obviously the bike paths that come up Oxford Street and then terminate at Scarborough Beach Road, and then bike paths that start the other side of the town centre. Was there any consideration of how we could connect those two dotted lines?
Yeah, through you, Mayor Cole, with the transport network, we've did an analysis at a high level of where the gaps were, and are working together with the alongside the development of the integrated transport plan, so that the two documents can inform each other. In terms of the specific link that you've mentioned, we were waiting until the integrated transport plan is prepared to provide commentary on that. But I will add, if I may, that I know there's been some discussion about having starter boxes introduced at the Scarborough Beach Road intersection where Oxford North meets, and I think through the traffic calming in that area, trying to lower the traffic speeds so that it is safe for cyclists to be able to use a starter box, and then they will be we'll look at implementing them.
I recall from the consultation with the community about Axford Park that there was strong opposition to a welcome statement being included at the top of Oxford Street right there. Given there's a proposal to have a welcome statement, where would we be proposing to put it?
Through you, Mayor Cole, the location of the welcome statement isn't yet determined, so understand that there was some feedback during the Axford Park consultation that that wasn't considered a suitable location. If that is adopted in the place plan, then we would look to do an investigation and work collaboratively with the community to understand where is the best place for that to go and what it should look like.
Are we definitely having one? My read of it would suggest that is to implement one, but I'm not sure if there's actually appetite from the community for one.
At this stage, I think the action refers to investigating a location or something to that effect. I'll confirm that in the briefing notes.
Councillor Castle.
Through you, Mayor Cole, just a couple of small questions, or maybe not so small. Item 1.2 refers to banner poles. I'm just wondering, are we locked into banner poles, or are we open to including alternatives if that's deemed not to be the suitable marketing tool?
Yeah, through you, Mayor Cole, in a similar approach to an entry statement, we would work together with the community and the local town team to determine what the most appropriate marketing mechanism is, noting that banner poles have been mentioned in the past for the Mount Hawthorn Town Centre, and that's why they're identified in the place plan, but there's certainly some flexibility when we go to implement that action.
And is there has there been any discussion about actions to address commercial vacancies, and whether there's any measures that we need to take in this town centre to address that?
Yeah. Through Mayor Cole, commercial vacancies appears at the moment to be less of an issue for the Mount Hawthorn Town Centre, though there has been a real appetite from the hub to help implement training for tenants to better understand their rights under the regulations from a tenancy point of view. So we're working collaboratively with members of the hub to expand on that idea, and it also relates to work that we're doing through the preparation of the economic development strategy and our business engagement program. So there's nothing specific for Mount Hawthorn Town Centre at this stage, because we don't feel that it's facing the extent of issue as other town centres in the city. At this stage, it's looking at the broader view.
So could perhaps some of those learnings from what we're seeing on Beaufort Street and what we're doing with the economic development strategy be applied as preemptive measures, and perhaps its place is better suited in the overarching place plan rather than specifically in Mount Hawthorn, but just so that we don't wait till we're in that position before we worry about it.
Through you, Mayor Cole, the work that we're doing on Beaufort Street, we are structuring it in a way that we're using it as essentially like a pilot project so that we can understand how that impacts the economy of that area and how we could then apply that to our other town centres in a proactive fashion if we feel that that's required.
Councillor Fotakis.
Thank you, Mayor. Through you to the manager, or not quite acting director yet, but just a couple of points. I just wanted to just follow up from Councillor Castle's comment regarding the commercial vacancies, and just those preemptive, preventative strategies. I just wanted to put that on the table and just ask, whether we could actually consider a little bit more attention to that, because I think I concur with Councillor Castle that it's not the situation that we want to wait until something happens, so if I can request maybe some consideration for that. The upper end of Oxford Street, where we've just undertaken quite some major works, and it's looking fantastic there. So was there consideration given to, I know we've got Axford Park within this, but looking specifically at that part of Oxford Street, considering the work that's just been undertaken?
Through you, Mayor Cole, as I mentioned before, we're looking at the starter boxes at the intersection of Oxford Street and Scarborough Beach Road. I think in addition to that, it's not specifically at that intersection, but looking at improving lighting where at the intersection of Anzac Road and Scarborough Beach Road, and there's a couple of other lighting projects that are proposed in the place plan to continue to, I guess, enhance the public realm and the amenity alongside those improvements that we've made with the tree planting and the paving.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor, again, I just wanted to maybe draw specifically to maybe some additional seating or just opportunities for people to really enjoy that part of Oxford Street, just to linger a little bit longer. And I think just based on the successes that we've had in Leederville, whether there'd been further consideration given to parklets and the like.
Through you, Mayor Cole, in terms of the seating, I think there's an action off the top of my head about the streetscapes broadly in the area, so we'll certainly look at the seating as part of that. With regards to parklets, there's nothing included in the place plan specifically about parklets because that process is already established in the city, and certainly at any point in time a business owner can approach the city and we would support them through that process to develop a parklet in the town centre.
Councillor Murphy.
I'm just wondering if, I'm not sure if it's appropriate or not, but was there consideration by the city to do a business audit as of 2019, of businesses uses in the town centre, like 15 hairdressers, one gelato shop, 5 cafes, that sort of thing, like just a basic audit, just so, and perhaps identify some deficiencies or over supply?
Through Mayor Cole, so there's a land use map on page 11 of the draft place plan, which shows that was done, I believe, late 2018, early 2019, and so that's the current land uses that was the current land uses that are in the town centre. So you can see a breakdown there, public purpose, hospitality, entertainment type uses. It doesn't go specifically to like individual business names, but does look at the uses. If this document's approved by council, and then subsequently advertised. We'll then update that plan before the final one's adopted by council so that it's up to date.
Thank you.
Councillor Gonchevsky.
Just in relation to the some of the wording in or the actions, particularly the nighttime economy, where the action is to facilitate the development of Mount Hawthorn's nighttime economy where possible. I'm just wondering if how the city would envisage reporting against that or determining that action has been met, or what sort of proactive strategies the city might take in that facilitation of that development. Anyway, that's my question to the manager, if possible.
Yeah. Through you, Mayor Cole. So that action is really about us liaising with the existing business owners and incoming business owners to identify opportunities where they might be able to extend their trading into the nighttime economy. It's something that we're kind of careful about doing because there has been efforts in Mount Hawthorn before to increase the nighttime trade during the week that were not as successful as intended, and so we're kind of that process is really about engaging more closely with the business owners and finding opportunities where that is viable for them to do that.
I'm just wondering if the intent is to liaise with existing and incoming business owners to identify opportunities to extend trade into nighttime hours, whether that might be a more specific action.
Yeah. We can certainly update the wording.
And I guess my only other one in terms of the action wording is that there's a number of things where we are investigating the potential for something, and whether if in any of those we're at a point where we might be able to I guess just in relation to, say, the future youth space, whether we're investigating the potential or whether we are identifying potential sites for a youth space within the Mount Hawthorn area. And then the same with, there was I think one other where it was sort of, no, that'll do, but I guess just whether if some of that wording might be more specific, just to allow us to ultimately report against the other actions and demonstrate a bit easier that we've done what we've said we'll do.
Through you, Mayor Cole, we can certainly look at making the wording more specific where we've used terminology like investigate. We can look at making that more specific so that it has a bit more meaning to it.
Thank you. Other than that was really great.
I just wanted to pick up on some of the community budget submissions that we had this year. So in the Mount Hawthorn Town Centre, we did have a couple of community budget submissions around improving significant verges within the town centre area. So, and one is not really a verge, but the Telstra building site, which I think the response to that has been that we will go to Telstra and ask them whether we can actually plant it out and make it look nice. And I think the other one that was put forward was around the verge near Treadways, which at this point has not been recommended because that business owner hasn't been supportive. But certainly if you sort of head down the street a little bit near Flinders Street car park near Coogee Street, Coogee Street's not so bad, the private car park, the verge is pretty unattractive, and I think that that might, even sort of planting out some of those verges near the car parks could potentially be something worth considering. And that has been raised that because it's come up through the community budget submissions. So I think potentially, I guess the question is, could the Mount Hawthorn Place plan consider more opportunities for verge planting in and around the town centre, including around the car park areas?
Through Mayor Cole, there's an action to look at the rationalisation of the car parks between Fairfield Street and Flinders Street, which is sort of picking up on that, the issues in that area. So perhaps we can include the upgrades to those key verges in that action, or another one. Take a look at that during the week.
I think there's around the Telstra building, there's potentially around definitely around the Flinders car park area. You could, look at some areas which could be planted out, which would make quite a dramatic impact to the town centre if we did ever decide to look at the verge around Treadways, for example, where that would have potentially have a visual impact. And the other question I had is whether there's going to be any direct engagement with business owners during the consultation period.
At this stage, the consultation is really focused on the town team, but it's possible that we can expand that to letter drops to the business owners as well.
Thank you. Any further questions? Okay. Next item is 5.7, Place Plan Minor Annual Review. Councillor Toppelberg.
Thank you. Just a request through to the responsible officer. Can we get, instead of having the two versions of the two place plans, can we just get the track changes version and the clean one? Because otherwise, for those people who don't get excited by reading through word for word each one side by side, it's hard to work out exactly what's changed between them. I know there are some obvious things like North Perth Common and some of the references there, but it'd be good to have a track changes version rather than just the new and the old, if that's possible, please.
Any other questions? That was a great question. Okay. Is that possible, Manager? Because I felt like I was endlessly going through place plans and they look kind of identical, but it's like, where's Wally?
Yeah, through Mac, I'll see what we can do during the week in terms of the changes. The documents are designed in design. It's not as straightforward as when it's a Word document to just turn it on and off. Yeah, I agree. We'll see what we can do during the week. But in terms of the changes, any of the substantial changes are really confined to the implementation table, and those are shown in the updated attachment 3 and attachment 4. And any other change that's been made to the document has been editorial, like a word or a comma or something like that. But we'll do our best to provide it anyway.
I think what you're describing is fine, but I think it should just perhaps mention in the body of the report that any change to the actual document other than those highlighted in red in the attachment has just been formatting and grammatical, if that's all there is, or just been highlighting in the actual report itself. If there have been any additional changes, we don't want you to then have to go back and create an artificially track changes document if that's all it is. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Any other questions? No. Next item is 6.1, Waste Strategy Project 2, Bulk Hard Waste Junk Service Options Appraisal. Questions?
Yeah.
Councillor Toppelberg.
Thank you. First question, so of the options presented, the on-request service that was presented as an option, there's not a great deal of discussion about how that would work. Can I ask whether, can I ask how that would envisage that would work? So I understand, for example, the City of Swan gives 3 options. You get up to 2 collections per year on demand. So either 2 green, 2 bulk, or 1 of each. So you can mix it up. They also, for some reason, collect up to 3 mattresses per property per financial year, which I find a bit odd, but that's a separate question. But can I just get some understanding of the modelling that was done on on-demand service? What was actually assumed? Is it 1 of each? Is it only bulk waste, or is it just bulk verge in general?
Through you, Mayor Cole, at this stage it was based just on a bulk waste collection, 1 per annum. When we go out to tender, we will look at all the options of what we specifically want to include, whether that is 3 mattress collections, 1 white goods, and we'll have a scale, a number of options that we can include in there.
Okay, so can I just get an idea? So the consultation, because there's a number of elements to it, so effectively the officer recommendation just says there are options and we will consult. So the simplest system for those who are tech savvy is whatever we do, if it's available to them, they can just go online and look. And obviously that's not the demographic of a large part of Vincent. We're conscious of that. Is the consultation dealing with just the principle of what will be collected and how, or also how that would be arranged, and so the booking service or the options that are available to people? Will the consultation actually explain that to people as well? And can't really explain till next week why I asked that question, but hopefully it's inferred that it may have an impact on people's desirability for one service or another if the way in which that service would be conducted is not explained as part of the consultation, potentially.
Through you, Mayor Cole. Sorry. Yeah, the options are all questioned with the through the consultation. We've raised in there whether you'd like to. I'll just quickly go through the questions, if I may. Whether you'd like to receive that via the telephone, whether you'd like to do online booking, whether you'd like to see it as part of your rates, or whether you'd like to see it excluded from your rates as a pay-as-you-go option. So all of the options that we are considering are outlined in there, and to try and gauge what the preference would be from the community.
Okay. Thank you. And as far as the information that's to be provided in terms of the economic and the environmental data, in terms of potential savings or benefits or costs of, is that to be presented in the same way that it's presented in the report? So just in terms of the advantages and disadvantages, or are we looking at statistically providing diversion from landfill, cost to the city, etc., and approximate costs that we've used in our modelling, so that people, when they make a decision, will have that information at hand? If that, or is that possible?
Yes, we can provide what a typical cost would be. At this stage, we haven't, but we can certainly go into that detail.
Okay, and then my understanding is that we would be seeking this information this calendar year, making a decision as part of the budget process for next year, but intending to not. So the effectively of going through this process now is that there won't be any bulk service offered at all until July 1 next year, or at the earliest, and that includes both bulk waste and green. Is that correct?
The bulk hard waste will be, as you've suggested, from the 1st of July. However, we will be going out to tender on the out for quote on the green waste collections. There's no proposed change to the green waste collections, as we get 100% diversion, and it is a much lower processing cost.
Okay, thank you.
What would be the options for council in relation to maintaining a service for a further year, or implementing a short tender for a further year, and what would the timeframes be to get that happening if we wanted to have an ongoing service prior to a decision?
Through you, Michael, yeah, we can go out to that pretty quickly. We can do it through either Walgary quotes, or we can go out to quotes with the value of it. It's there certainly would be some interest on that for a short-term year.
Councillors, Councillor Fotakis.
So just to clarify, when was the last bulk collection waste, and that just confirming that there will not be one in February 2020?
Yes, the last collection was in February, March, and it won't be another one next year. That's correct.
Councillor Murphy.
Has the city consulted any of the new providers, such as Garage Sale, Trail and Buy Nothing groups, just to seek potential alternatives? out-of-the-box thinking?
Not at this stage, no.
Could you think of anything that they might be able to assist you with?
Through you, Michael. You'll see in the report that there's some information on alternatives. So we're very keen to signpost people who currently use the bulk waste service and put everything out on the Verge, and hope that it's, some of it's recyclable and it could be collected by other members of the public. We are very keen, through whatever the new service is, to signpost people so they can access other organisations where that furniture, etc., could be collected and reused. So we are very keen. It's early stages, so we've not contacted anyone directly, but you'll see the report does refer to Facebook, Gumtree, etc., where some of those services already exist. You'll also see that we've mentioned the opportunity for somebody, and we were very relaxed to Vincent, for somebody to put something on the Verge, but free to go at home, and if that's what they want to do, if it's a useful piece of furniture, etc. So we are open to other suggestions and out-of-the-box thinking. I think the scale of what we provide for many organisations would be pretty big. If we were to ask some of the small organisations to provide a service for the entire Vincent, I think that would be a struggle at this stage anyway.
Just a few questions. I'm just really interested to know why we wouldn't consider, or why administration didn't consider the importance of upfront public engagement and communication strategy as part of going out with options to the community, rather than doing that after options have been consulted on.
Through you, Nicole, the intention of the stage is to consult people on the potential options and get feedback, then bring that back to council for them to select a preferred option, very similar to the approach we used at Fogo. And when that preferred option is selected, then we would engage more deeply with the public to explain what the proposal for the new service is. That's the current intention.
Was there any consideration that this is seen to be quite a significant change from a community perception point of view, based on some of the responses we received to the notice of motion, and that it might be better to actually go out with a rationale and information, to actually go out to the community first to put in context why we are seeking to make this change, what the purpose is, the driver behind it, pros and cons, and then potentially looking at having that conversation as part of going out with options?
Through you, Nicole, that is the intention, to explain the context and the background and some of the thinking, and to ask some questions about the potential options. So that definitely is the intention with the current consultation.
Is that something then you can provide to council, that level of information, and the draft survey that hasn't been submitted with the report?
Through you, Nicole, it's still being worked on, but the intention was that we would share it with elected members before we went live with that consultation, absolutely.
Okay. Also, does administration feel that it's pragmatic and realistic to go out with a no service option to the community?
Through you, Nicole, in an options appraisal, that is an option. One of the options to carry on exactly as we are now. One is to not provide the service. We're not required by law to provide that service. So it definitely is an option, and we know there is a section of the community that think that is the correct option. If council do not wish to consult on that option, then it can be removed from the consultation. That isn't a problem.
Would you be able to provide an update of complaints received about the bulk waste collection in the last 12 months, and any complaints received about ceasing the service?
Through you, Michael, yeah, we'll take that on notice and get the information for you for the briefing notes.
Thank you. Also, in terms of the existing service, is there any option to provide additional sorting and recovery if we were to continue business as usual while we went through this consultative process?
Through you, Michael. We've done that already this last year. We sent our tonnage through to EMRC. However, they were unable to recover very much. We did save $50 a tonne though, so we saved a significant amount of money, but unfortunately, as we'd already recovered the metals at source, there was very little that they could recover through their process. So we're hoping that as more people come online with more with better sorting facilities, we should be able to progress that.
Thank you. And just in relation to the on-demand services that would be advertised, can you provide some more information about whether it would, I know it talks about whether it would be Skip or Verge, or whether it would be able to be something that a resident could choose for themselves. There's just not a lot of information in the report about what an on-demand service could or would look like, or what the options under that would be.
Yeah, we have put those options in the draft consultation that's going out. What would be your preferred option of collection, whether it would be a skip collection where space permits, or whether they'd like a mattress collection, how many white goods and things. So all those will be built into the consultation. We'll get that feedback and then we'll use that to what we go out with, for the specification for tender.
Well, given that this is an informing part of this process, could you please provide that information about how you intend to run this consultation as part of the council report? Thank you. Councillor Gondaszewski, did you have a question?
Just in terms of this is, in relation to the additional detail on what a on-demand service could look like, as to whether it might be in the report or it might be in my head, and whether there's been consideration in relation to the capacity for residents that may wish to run a bulk collection with their neighbours, for example, to whether that has been either included in the consultation or could be factored, I presume it could be factored into any future potential tender for this sort of a service.
Through you, Michael. Where I've worked previously, where they've implemented skip collections, it has been left to the residents and the neighbours to work together. They've often shared resources, so they've not felt that they could fill a full skip. Then they have shared that. It's not been something that we've looked at as a formal arrangement, but generally it's sort of work between the neighbours.
I think I was more referring to if, say, we did an on-demand pickup that was Verge based, whether there would be the capacity for 2 or 3 houses to have that service within the same time period, so that they could then potentially promote that they have through the Buy Nothing groups or through their local Facebook community groups, that there was some treasures that may be available to pick up, but I guess just as to whether that I presume that capacity would then need to be built into any tender to be able to do a certain level of pickups, and just whether that information is possible to consider. And then also, I guess, in terms of how this has worked in other areas, in terms of what parameters and, I guess, service levels have been provided by the tenderers around on-demand pickups, and what waiting times, and I may have missed it if it's there, what waiting times there have been for on-demand pickups in other areas that have implemented these services.
Through you, Michael. We've certainly done benchmarking with other local governments and through the MRC. We've got quite a detailed list of what is provided elsewhere, and we will seek clarification from the other local governments as to what they've built into their specifications and how they've managed that process. We will do that as part of the specification anyway.
Councillor Castle.
Through you, Mayor Cole, just a clarification on the consultation that is proposed, and obviously that this might be answered when we see more detail next week, but can I confirm that one of the options that will be presented to people is no change, and that it's not simply option 1 to 4, but it would also include the baseline option?
Yes, I can confirm that's correct.
If that is that case, can that be explicitly stated in the report? Because the report does not state that no change is one of the options that would be presented to the community. Councillor Fotakis.
Thank you, Mayor. Through Mayor to the officer. Just also looking at those options, just a question on how those 4 additional options were arrived at, but also too, it's just a follow-on from some of the points, the questions that Councillor Gontaszewski had with regards to the process being able to identify additional options and ideas. I suppose some assurance that the consultation process would actually allow that to happen.
Through you, Nicole. In terms of our options, I suppose I ought to be straight, is that we, we see putting something on the Verge to be disposed of via landfill as a last option. So absolutely, in any on-demand service, we would be very keen to encourage people that if they had items that could be recycled or reused, that there are other options. So we absolutely would signpost people to that in that way. The other thing to say is that we already have on-demand services. So we currently have an on-demand mattress service. At any time, you can book a mattress collection, put it on the Verge. It's paid at $20, which is the market rate. And as from July, we'll be offering the same service for white goods, for fridges, etc. So we already have some on-demand services, and so some of the suggestions are to extend that on-demand service, if that makes sense.
We currently, with the current process, some people have quite narrow verges, so they are able to place stuff on their verge. But if you've got a skip bin, where would you stick a skip bin if you've only got a 50 centimetre wide verge?
Yeah, the skip bin, we appreciate, is not going to be suitable for all locations, so we would have an option. A skip bin could be an option, or a loose collection where space doesn't permit.
Just to flag, we'll wait to see what comes back through the briefing notes, but I am considering an alternate motion to the officer recommendation to look at doing the detailed public engagement and communication strategy up front, depending on what comes back with additional information, and to not support option 1 to cease the service unless administration has got lots and lots of emails from community members demonstrating that that's a popular option, and just in relation to business as usual while we go through this process, so that we still have a continuation of service, but would be interested to know whether we could look at any additional sorting, noting that was attempted this year, or whether we could look at a shorter presentation time on the Verge that has those sorts of issues have been raised, given around amenity and Verge access, and also just whether we would have an opportunity potentially to have some more tailored or detailed options, particularly for on-demand services, and whether we would even potentially consider seeking some feedback from our community engagement panel to inform a public engagement and communication strategy before options were then presented to the community. Any further questions? Okay, moving on. Next item is minor parking restriction improvements amendments. Councillor Loden.
My understanding is part of the intent here is to basically stop 2 cars parking on opposing sides of the road to allow large vehicles to get through. Given that, wouldn't it be better to consider extending those no parking lines further up so that you can't actually park between those 2 yellow portions? Does that make sense, what I'm saying?
Through you, Mayor Cole. The reason I'm recommending the no stopping be only extended to the southern boundary of 44 is we haven't consulted with the wider community and the immediate problems that are at the top end of Scarborough Beach Road, and the resident of 44 is very supportive of the change, and I think it will largely address most of the issues in Pennant Street.
So is there a risk that because we have no parking there, we'll get people parking in front of 42, 40 and 38, and then on the opposite side of the street on, I can't really read, I think it's 35, 37, 37, 39 and 41?
Through you, Mayor Cole, from essentially 44 heading south towards Howlett Street, you have far more crossovers and Verge parking that naturally control the on-road parking. So there's improved or increased passing opportunities from that point.
Any further questions? Okay, we'll move on to item 7.1, late report, investment report as at 31st of May. No, we've done that one. 31st of May 2019. Yes?
Thank you, and I appreciate the acting director may not have the information at hand and may need to consult with the manager, but just can we get some indication? I understand that all of our term deposits were, the investment date was prior to the Reserve Bank's latest movement, and I understand that some of the banks, the response to home mortgage rates has been to pass on the full amount, but then perhaps to reduce the level of interest that's offered on term deposits by a greater amount than the 0.25%. So can we just get some indication of what the forward outlook looks like for term deposits as these come to maturity? That would be helpful because I can't see interest rates heading north anytime soon.
Through you, Mayor Cole, I will take that on notice and include some commentary in that regard in the briefing notes.
Any other questions in relation to the investment report? Okay. 7.2, late report, authorisation of expenditure for the period 1st to the 31st of May 2019. Purely just out of interest, Director, I was wondering what happened to the cancellation of the seniors trip.
Through you, Mayor Cole, as it happens, I noticed that in the expenditure report this evening, and I'm intrigued myself. So generally speaking, those trips are only cancelled when there's a lack of numbers, but I will confirm that and include that in the briefing notes.
Thank you very much. I know that we have less bus trips than we used to, so I'm interested. Yep. Any further questions on expenditure? No. Okay, item 7.3, financial statements as at 31st of May 2019. No, okay. We have dealt with the budget for now. Item 7.5, amendments to the Parking and Parking Facilities Local Law 2007. Councillor Toppelberg.
Thank you. I did speak to the Director yesterday, briefly, just about, I guess just flagging a potential amendment, or it might even be a subsequent motion, because it doesn't deal directly with the officer recommendation, but at a time when you're advertising a local law, but just flagging that there has been some feedback, my understanding there's been some feedback, both the officers and elected members, in relation to the removal of the 24-hour parking infringement, and in the conversation I had with the Director, and I'll ask him to make comment, but looking at potentially introducing a definition of a nuisance vehicle or something similar, which may allow or give council the ability to step in where the current framework doesn't provide for any level of infringement, or people aren't actually breaking the local parking law, and particularly where people are electing to park their vehicle outside of their neighbours' properties for extended periods of time for nothing other than the convenience of not parking it out the front of their own property. So perhaps if we can just get some comment from the Director. I know we only spoke yesterday, but we'll look to bring something to potentially add a further amendment to the law whilst it's being advertised.
Through you, Mayor Cole, the previous clause that was within section 8.8 of the local law was the 24-hour clause that enabled a vehicle parked in one location deemed to be causing an obstruction to be removed or impounded, I should say. That was obviously removed during the last amendment to this local law, and administration ultimately was satisfied with that decision on the basis that the majority of circumstances that were reported to the city's rangers, the vehicle was in fact not deemed to be causing an obstruction. More often than not, a vehicle would be registered, we would know who the owner was, and in many circumstances it would have a parking permit and it was legally parked on a thoroughfare or on street. The issue with that previous clause was the link to the definition of an obstruction. There have been a number of circumstances where situations, as referred to by Councillor Toppenberg, have been reported to the city's rangers. It will be important, if Council does move to make such an amendment, to get the definition of nuisance or obstruction correct. Quite often rangers are, I guess, pulled into neighbourly disputes, for want of a better word, rangers can certainly point to a number of examples. So I guess the challenge for administration, if Council does want to look at something like this, is to just make sure the definition of obstruction or nuisance is adequate so that rangers can enforce it based on Council's intent, as opposed to getting stuck in a neighbour dispute where a vehicle just happens to be parked for an extended period of time. We do need to consider other situations like fly-in, fly-out workers as well, whose vehicles might indeed be in a single location for 4 weeks at a time, not necessarily causing obstruction, but could indeed cause a nuisance or an inconvenience to an adjacent resident. So whilst administration aren't necessarily opposed to Council considering this, it will just be really important to better understand Council's intent and to make sure that any definition in the local law is appropriate to support a 24-hour clause or something similar.
Just for clarity.
Yes, go ahead.
Sorry, just for clarity, and well before Tuesday I'll circulate some wording in conjunction with the officers, but I think I didn't have any intent for 24 hours to be the focal point. It's more so the nuisance factor, so how that's defined and the length of time or otherwise will be something that will be determined, but I think the 24-hour idea is long gone.
Councillors, any further questions? Okay. We will look forward to that, Councillor Toppelberg. Our next item is 7.6, Late Report City Homelessness Framework Committee Draft Action Plan. Any questions? Councillor Loden?
The plan sort of details a large number of actions, and it appears to make reference to something that's kind of similar to a collective impact approach around creating a common agenda and stuff like that. I was wondering if there's any sort of shared measurement of what people and shared objectives within all the organisations that are collaborating around this activity.
Through you, Mayor Cole. I guess the gathering together of the action plan through the Homelessness Framework Committee chaired by the City of Perth, it has been a collaborative process, and represented on that committee has been government, non-government agencies, service providers, not-for-profits, NGOs, and a whole bunch of the goodwill organisations. So it is a shared agenda. The agenda is, rather than managing homelessness, working towards ending homelessness, and you'll see in the draft action plan the 4 different themes. We are participating on the unsolicited goods and services workshop, and we are leading that with the City of Perth in terms of the accreditation process.
And is there some form of central, like administrative or lead agency that's sort of making this all happen and organising all the meetings and pulling it all together and coordinating?
Through you, Mayor Cole. Yes, the City of Perth has, I guess, been conducting the administrative function of that. The committee is chaired by John Kerry and also Gai McMath, one of the commissioners over at the City of Perth. And we also are working with the Department of Communities because they are doing their 10-year strategy towards ending homelessness.
And just on the measurement side of things, is there any numbers of where we are currently and where we're planning to be?
Just in what regard? Sorry?
So we have X number of homeless people, and there's probably there's a number of categorisations of homelessness within that at certain levels and so forth, and we are planning to go from there to, I mean, obviously ending homelessness is the ultimate goal, but in 2 years' time, 5 years' time, we are aiming to be at this point, and these are the strategies that we're going to employ to deliver on that outcome.
Okay, thank you. As I said, yes, working towards the goal of ending homelessness, and I guess the framework will deliver on those outcomes, but at the moment, no, we don't have any direct measures or anything that we're working towards. We're starting off with the accreditation process to deal with the unsolicited goods and services and the goodwill groups, just to get a little bit more of a collaborative approach around that, looking at gaps, duplication and all that kind of stuff. So that's where we're starting.
Have you finished, Councillor Loden? Councillor Topelberg?
Thank you. What's the proposed penalties for non-compliance with the... so, for example, if I want to go and set up a table and hand out food, what happens to me if someone comes along and says I can't do that and I say, no, I'm staying here? What's the intended outcome?
Through you, Mayor Cole. The accreditation process, there's no cost associated with that. We will administer that as the City of Perth will administer theirs as well. And so at the moment, we're focusing on more the unsolicited goods, the service providers, the goodwill groups that we don't know about that are kind of falling between the cracks. At this point, it will probably fall out that a lot of those groups that are already providing those types of services may not get accredited, and then what we will do is we will work with them to, I guess, funnel them into areas where their services will be needed. In the action plan, we talk about Volunteering WA coordinating, like a jobs board, I suppose, and so that's what we're moving to. In terms of punitive actions, we're not really looking at that at the moment, but under the local government, the property law, we do have move-on orders, I think they're called. Mick, if you can... Sorry, move on. Local government notice. We can issue that type of stuff, but we haven't taken that stance at this point in time.
So, and if the service I wish to provide is just listening to the sound of my own voice or sharing that, and so I choose that location as the location of choice, and I'm not accredited, that's is my understanding then that the two cities or the group will seek to encourage me to go and have my voice heard elsewhere where perhaps it's more needed, but if I choose to stand in that particular location and share my wealth of irrelevant knowledge, then that's ultimately what will happen. Is that correct?
Through you, Mayor Cole, as I said, I guess what we're going to do primarily is try and funnel them to avoid the duplication, because these groups, we're very conscious that moving on these types of groups could garner us some negative criticism in the media and so forth. So there are education pieces and all of that structured around in the action plan to address this. I guess the approach we are taking is to funnel them elsewhere so that their work is not wasted. And I guess we're trying to, the plan is to expand just out from the inner city to other local government areas as well. So I guess it's a first step. It is a big problem, and we do have a lot of groups out there that are doing good work, but it just might not be in the areas that are needed, and there's other areas where there's no services and, there's duplication and that type of thing.
And the 12-month approval for Manor Inc. was issued in October 2018. When is it intended that assuming that they either reapply, or assuming they do reapply, when is that proposed to come to Council for a decision?
Through you, Mayor Cole, at this point in time, it is scheduled to bring another report back in November to make a decision as to whether to grant a further approval to Manor Inc. We're certainly hopeful with the accreditation process kicking off with the City of Perth in August that we will have gained some momentum and have a better understanding of the accreditation process and probably more specifically where some of the services are best located. So we're hopeful that we've got a better understanding as to whether World Square is the preferred location for Manor Inc. moving forward prior to the need for Council to make a further decision about another permit for Manor Inc. to operate from World Square.
And so just on that, is the intent that the accreditation process will potentially usurp, not that it means that people won't have an opportunity to make application, but that perhaps these sorts of things will be resolved through the accreditation and service provision process with that working group rather than actually coming to council as an application for use within a reserve or another space?
Yeah, through you, Mayor Cole, absolutely. So groups like Manor Inc. will also go through the accreditation process as well.
Councillors, any further questions? Okay. The next item, my mountain of papers, is we've done Florida Athena, so moving on to Chief Executive Officer items. 8.1 Corporate Business Plan Progress Update. Any questions? CBP? No? Okay, next item is 8.2 Community Budget Submissions. Any questions? Councillor Fotakis is just leaving the room, so just... What did I say? I'm fixated on Councillor Fotakis tonight. It's such a beautiful name. Sorry. I don't think that everyone looks like Councillor Fotakis. It's just rolling off the tongue tonight, so... Okay, are there any questions about community budget submissions? I understand all submitters have been notified. Interesting to note that there wasn't really anyone speaking from the public gallery, so perhaps that assumes a high level of satisfaction with the response, or not. But $340,000 has been committed, so that is a good outcome. No questions? Okay, we can call Councillor Fotakis back in. Did I say it again? Oh my God. This is what happens when it gets close to 9 o'clock. I apologise. I might be following you home tonight, Councillor Fotakis. Oh dear. Welcome back, Councillor Castle. I think the CEO's got a point. It's because everyone's wearing black, and Councillor Fotakis is a beacon in light cream over here. Yes. Thank you, Councillor Loden. That helps. 8.3 Monthly Review of Policies in accordance with the City's Policy Review Plan. Any questions? 8.3? No. 8.4 Termination of Multicultural Services Centre of WA's sublease of the Wellness Centre at Woodville Reserve at 10 Farmer Street, North Perth. Questions? 8.5 Annual Review of Council Delegations. Questions? Councillor Councillor Gonchevsky.
So this is just in relation to the planning delegations. Just a question, and I've lost it where I'm at in my docs on tap. Just in relation to what sort of planning applications, in light of the changes, what sort of planning applications may come to council, if these changes were to go through, my understanding is basically we would really primarily just be seeing more than five objections and car parking and small bars? No. Yes. If I could just get some clarity on what we're likely to see in the planning space should these changes go through.
Yes, through you, Mayor Cole. There's two ways of answering that. Probably the easiest way, rather than listing all the things you will see, is to say that in the last 12 months, you'll see all the same things you've seen in the last 12 months, except for 5 applications. We went through and had a look, and those applications were group dwelling applications where there was more than 3 dwellings proposed. There was a couple of those, and there was a couple of applications that were greater than 3 stories, and there was a couple of applications that were JDAP applications where an extension of time was sought, and the applicant sought the determination under that provision of the regs to try and make it a streamlined, smooth process as part of the amendment. So they were the types of applications that you won't see anymore. Otherwise, everything else would still come to council because of the objections, because of the car parking, or because the land use itself requires it to be determined by council, or for some other reason that's listed in those conditions.
So, given that you've done that research, could you just tell me, in relation to those applications that did come to council, could you just confirm that council's decision making was in line with the recommended motion from the officers in those instances?
Yes, through Mayor Cole, I could check that. It wouldn't take me long because there's only 5 of them, but I haven't done that. So I'll do that and I'll confirm. I know that there was a billboard in there. I know that was the same. That was the only one I checked, so I'll let you know about the others as well.
Thank you, that would be lovely.
I'm just going through what's proposed versus what we had a previous iteration of at a workshop. So, educational establishment, that's okay. I don't sort of need to ask anything about that. So how is 2 different to what came to was a previous iteration? Because when it's deemed to comply building height for 3 stories or more, what if there were wildly different other variations that, overall meant that it was quite a significant bulk and scale, but the height was compliant?
Yes, through you, Mayor Cole. The changes, so I think originally administration proposed the short-term accommodation style uses being delegated. There was concern raised around that, some questions raised around the existing policy, which administration agreed meant that there wasn't an alignment between the community and council's position on those issues and the policy we had, and so it was certainly appropriate for those applications to be determined by council until that policy had been updated at the very least. There was a proposal around the minor amendments to council decisions, and given council made that decision, administration considered it appropriate for council to continue to make decisions on any amendments that are proposed by applicants. So that has reverted back. They were the main 2 changes that occurred after discussions that I can recall. I think there was some others, and we'll put those in the briefing notes. In relation to the height, it would mean that if an application was over 3 stories but compliant with the height, but then it had a variation in terms of plot ratio or setbacks, and there was no objections, the car parking complied, etc., then that application could be determined by delegated authority, yes.
Okay, so I have a few questions. I think it's really along the lines of what Councillor Gonczewski is asking, is because we haven't really had a discussion around does council still want to be dealing with a certain level of development applications, what impact would this change to delegations likely have on the amount of DAs that council would be seeing at council? noting that they've already dwindled somewhat over the last probably 18 months. I also just want to ask about this issue of a call-in power, or the way in which the delegation works, that if there is a contentious issue where there might not be quite more than five submissions, but that may be noted by council members that it is a contentious application for immediate neighbours, for example. Can we get some more information around how the delegation works if council feels that there is an issue that, is it only an applicant that can request to have an item brought to council, or could a councillor or a group of councillors request an item come forward? And also I'm interested to know about unlisted uses under the new scheme and whether they should be presented to council always. Just noting that doggy daycare was an unlisted use.
Yes, there's a few questions there. I'll try and deal with those I can remember. The doggy daycare issue or situation. So currently there's no condition around unlisted uses being required to come to council, but there is a provision around the parking policy, as you're aware, which states that if a use isn't listed in the policy and the policy applies, that application will need to come to council for the parking standard to be determined. In the case of this application for doggy daycare, it actually sits within the Perth parking management area, and so the policy doesn't apply, and so there is the potential for some of those unlisted uses which fall within the Perth parking management area to be determined on delegated authority, because the parking standard is determined already as 0 under the City of Perth. In relation to, in relation to the call-in power, the current process and what's recommended is that an applicant, and our approach has been to take applications to council where an applicant requests it, and that's been a long-standing approach at the city. If an application receives more than 5 objections during the advertising period, again, been a long-standing approach of the city, then the application will be presented to council. And council has the ability to, through a decision, to call an application in or to change a delegation so an application is presented to council. So council always has that ability to pass a motion for an application to be determined by full council. If administration becomes aware that that's something that council members are looking to do, then we would obviously not determine that application and wait for that council meeting and decision.
Can I just say on that issue, the practicalities of the statutory timeframe, if a council member has to move a notice of motion at a meeting and then wait for a month for the report to come to council, that's a potentially significant delay. Is there another mechanism so that it can potentially, you would hope that if and just like the practicalities with the time frame, how would that actually work?
Yes, through you, Mayor Cole, if it was deemed necessary, council could do one of two things currently under this approach. They could wait for the ordinary council meeting, or they could propose a special council meeting if the issue was so significant as to warrant that. I'm thinking of something like a concrete batching plant, for instance, where we've done that in the past. In relation to other options that council members have for creating a condition in the delegations to allow a call-in, it is possible, but it does create delays in itself, because we would have to create a process by which the council members were given an opportunity to call an application in, and then that process would obviously extend the timeframes for the DAs as well. It would create uncertainty for applicants over and above what currently exists when it comes to the 5 objections, because that already creates issues for applicants where they're but then they can resolve that issue themselves now. They have the power to resolve that by speaking to their neighbours beforehand, and that's how we encourage them to do that. So it does create a time frame issue and a certainty issue. We would have to create a process around that so that individual council members could call applications to council.
But I think that the main question for me is that if these delegations go through, what would the estimated, I mean, I know that there's not, development is slow at the moment, but what would be the estimated impact on development applications coming to council for determination?
As in the numbers?
Yeah.
Yeah, so we reviewed the last 12 months and it was a total of 5 applications that wouldn't have been presented to council that were.
Is that something that that you think would be consistent as development starts to increase with the sorts of, just in terms of the sorts of applications that might start to come through? I know it's a bit of a guesstimating exercise, but 5 out of how many?
5 out of 114, I think it was, total applications. And the types of applications that we're seeing, I think it's more likely that those applications would go to council, given the scale of those applications, the height variations, and because any variation to height above 3 stories would need to come to council, and given the community concerns, the objections that we get for those types of applications, I think that as the economy turns, the types of applications we get are more likely to come to council than not.
And can I just ask a specific question about the remove the need for grouped and multiple dwellings, proposing more than 3 dwellings to be referred to council for determination in every instance? So only where building height is exceeded or where more than 5 objections are being received during community consultation. So would that mean that you could have multi-dwellings? How does this work in tandem with height, for example? So if you had a multi-dwelling but it wasn't breaching height, then it would still be determined by under delegated authority, as opposed to all multi-dwellings coming to council currently that don't go to the DAP.
Yes, through Mayor Cole, currently where there's between 4 and 9 or 4 and 10 multiple dwellings, they come to council. The proposal is that those proposals will only come to council where the applicant requests there's more than 5 objections or there's a variation to height.
Yep, okay.
Yes. My question would be, just in relation to those, whether there was a form of words that could be considered in relation to height and other variations that might trigger a referral to council, such as, or, and the same with the multi-dwelling and group dwelling, something, yeah. Whether that could be considered, happy to discuss as a potential amendment next week, or not. I guess, whereas if there's grouped or multiple dwellings of, say, 4 to 10, where setback variations exceed X, Y, or Z, or where, cumulative lot boundary setbacks are more than X amount outside the current policy provisions, etc. If that, I don't know if it would be a practical approach or not.
Yes, through Mayor Cole, it certainly would be possible to put together conditions around setbacks or plot ratio, etc. But if I would recommend that council members consider whether they're comfortable with multiple dwellings between 3 and 10 being considered at all. It might be cleaner just to, if an amendment was proposed, for that to simply revert to the current delegation that exists, which requires all multiple dwellings essentially to go to council.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. Just can you confirm in your investigations, I think I know the answer, but whether one of those 5 would have been the DA on Milton Street that the officers are recommended for approval? I can't, what's the number? 48, I think, Milton Street. It ended up at SAT with the mediated In fact, I think it went all the way. It's that from memory, but I'm fairly sure that 48 Milton Street came to council with a recommendation for approval, and council refused it. We had on-site mediation, came back, and then went back for a full hearing. But if we can just confirm if that was, it's either 40, well, it is 48. Now that I look at it, yes. I think if we can confirm that, please.
Yes, through Mayor Cole, we can confirm that. I don't have that on this list at the moment.
Any further questions on delegations? Okay. Next item is 8.6, appointment of an alternative member for the Mindarie Regional Council meeting on the 4th of July 2019. Any volunteers?
No, but I just, if I can just make, if I can just ask that when these things come in future, if we can get the location and the day of the week. It's a Thursday and it's at City of Stirling, but if we can just have those included so that it's clear, we don't have to go researching those things in future, please.
Sure, I'll ask the person who wrote the report to do that for you. But you can always email me or just contact Alicia Falconer, and she will also be able to tell you that information without you having to research. But yes, it should be in the report. Because, you know, it might come down to, is it at Cambridge versus is it at Wanneroo? So, oh, you will? Okay. Deputy Mayor is volunteering. Thank you, unless there's anyone else who wishes to fight it out with the Deputy Mayor.
I understand that Councillor Loden is not going to...
No, not available. Okay, we'll go with Deputy Mayor. Thank you very much for that, Deputy Mayor. We'll move on. 8.7, report and minutes of audit committee meeting held on the 9th of April 2019. Any questions? No. 8.8, information bulletin. No. No questions. Okay. That means that we have officially worked through all of the items on the agenda this evening. So at 13 minutes past 9, I declare the meeting closed. Thank you, everybody.
What about the nom?
Oh, there's a notice of motion. I should have remembered that. Sorry, I have the old agenda where it's not on, so I actually did read the agenda. But yes, it was not on my agenda. So no, the meeting is ongoing. We're going to have a very healthy question and answer on a notice of motion. 9.1, notice of motion, Mayor Cole, who had forgotten, request to modify delegated authority register for waiving cash in lieu of car parking for up to 5 bays. Are there any questions in relation to the NOM? Councillor Toppelberg.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. Actually, no, I don't have any questions. I'll make some contribution next week. Thank you.
Any questions on 9.1? No? Okay. That took a total of 1 minute, so I officially declare the meeting closed at 9 minutes 14. Thank you, everyone.